guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sydney, and if you are new here, this is just a little place where we can talk about true crime, scary stories, dark history, and today I got a juicy one for y'all. This is the last part in our 3-part little mini-series talking about The Exorcist. The first week we talked about Roland Doe and his exorcism that inspired the book and the movie The Exorcist. Last week we talked about the alleged curse surrounding the Exorcist film, and this week we are going to be talking about the extra that actually was a murderer. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure that you go ahead and like and subscribe because it really helps me out. But other than that, let's get right into the story. Today's story starts out with a man named Paul Bateson. So not a lot is known about Bateson's childhood, but what we do know is that he was born on August 24th of 1940 in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. In his young adult life, he served in the army, and he was actually serving overseas in Germany. In Bateson's own words, serving in Germany was not that interesting, and so the only thing really to do was drink. So this was the start of him drinking very heavily, and you'll see that this becomes a problem later on down the line as well. In 1964, he came back from his service overseas and decided to go to school to become a neurological radio technician. After his schooling, he ended up landing a job at the New York University Medical Center, and during this time, he also started his first really long-term relationship. It was said that they drank a lot and they threw a lot of parties at their home, and so of course, Bateson's drinking problem just continued, and it got really bad. So in 1973, this long-term relationship ended, and Bateson actually moved to Brooklyn Park and commuted to Manhattan every day for his job. This is how Bateson actually got to be in the movie The Exorcist. Director William Friedkin was actually at the University Medical Center trying to just observe some procedures, just get some ideas flowing for his movie. Bateson was actually assisting on an angiogram that Friedkin was watching, and Friedkin liked the way that the procedure looked so much that he decided that he wanted to put this sort of procedure in his movie, and he actually asked the team if they wanted to be the extras in the movie. So in the 1973 film The Exorcist, we can actually see Bateson kind of guiding Regan through this angiogram process, and he seems very calm, very collected, and a pretty nice man all around. Of course, watching the movie after knowing this fact is kind of creepy, but it doesn't make the movie any less good. So in 1975, Bateson's life started to go downhill. His drinking had gotten much worse, and the University Medical Center actually had to let him go because it was affecting his job. So he started working these little odd jobs. He'd do maintenance for his apartment building. He would sell tickets at a movie theater, just kind of odd jobs like that to sustain himself. He'd also started regularly attending AA meetings for his drinking, and he was seemingly on the right path to turn his life around. This was until 1977 when Bateson started to pick up his old habits again, including drinking. At this point, he was drinking up to a quart of vodka a day, and when he was sober enough to go out and party, he would go to different bars in the area. He usually would frequent different gay bars in the area, but he did have a kind of liking for the leather subculture, which was pretty big in the 1970s. Now, I don't know too much about the leather subculture. I tried to look some stuff up, so I do apologize if I'm getting anything wrong. But to my understanding, leather subculture is just a way for anybody, it's usually gay men, but anybody to kind of embrace, a more masculine, strong side of themselves, and this can be done by wearing leather pieces, things like that. So Bateson really liked these places because he thought the leather was cool, it impressed him. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about Addison Verrill. So Addison Verrill was a film reporter for Variety, and he was also pretty well known in the gay community. He was very popular and people really liked him. He even had like regular spots that he would go, and he had tables at different bars. He just seemed like a all-around really cool, nice person. On September 14th of 1977, Addison was found in his Horatio Street apartment, and he had been very badly beaten and stabbed. The police couldn't find any signs of forced entry, and they also couldn't find anything obvious that had been taken from the home. Besides really looking at the apartment, kind of investigating around the area, the police really didn't do much for Addison's case, and this was upsetting to his friends and people that he knew. At this point, a fellow journalist and a friend of Addison, his name was Arthur Bell, he wrote a very extensive piece talking about not only Addison's case, but the many murders of people in the gay community that were just going completely unnoticed by the police and authorities. Additionally, Bell talked about how many people in the media didn't even cover these types of stories because being gay was such a stigmatized thing. So this entire Greenwich Village area was just going completely without justice, and Bell kind of brought that to the light. So 8 days after this article was released, Bell got an anonymous phone call at his house. The caller said that he had been the one to kill Addison. Of course, this was very shocking to Bell, so he just kind of wanted to get as much information as he could, so he just kind of let the caller talk. The caller said that he really liked the writing and the story itself, but that he was not a psychopath. The caller then went on to tell Bell the entire story unprompted. The caller said that Addison offered to buy him a drink, and he accepted the offer. They stayed at the bar until about 3 a.m., and then at that point they actually went to a different bar called the Main Shaft, where they continued to drink and party throughout the night. The caller commented on how he was very surprised that somebody so popular and so kind would want to hang out with him. The pair then went back to Addison's house where they had sex. And after this point, it seems like something kind of changed within the caller's mind. The caller kind of explained that Addison hadn't been reciprocal. It wasn't just the sex act itself that wasn't reciprocal. It was the soul act too. I wanted a lasting thing, something that would go beyond sex, into friendship, a lover, or marriage. The way that the caller was talking, it seemed like he felt maybe used, or maybe like Addison didn't feel the same way that the caller felt about Addison. And it's at this point where things turned very dark. The caller recounted on how he went to the kitchen, grabbed a frying pan, and hit Addison hard over the head with it. Once Addison was unconscious, the caller went back to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and brutally stabbed and beat Addison until it was clear that he was dead. The caller was talking about how he should have stabbed a little bit higher and to the left because his placement just wasn't well. You know, I can't imagine being Bell throughout this entire conversation, because he just had to sit there and listen to the caller talk about brutally murdering his fellow journalist and his friends. Can you even imagine that? That sounds just awful. So I can't imagine Bell having to maintain his composure throughout this entire thing. It's wild. The caller also said that he took $57, Addison's MasterCard and passport, and some random clothes before leaving Addison's place to go buy alcohol. So once this phone call had ended, Bell immediately called the police, who rushed over to Bell's house in case the caller might phone again. It was important that they were there because this was the first real piece of evidence that they actually had, and this evidence was a literal confession, so now they were paying attention. And sure enough, a few hours later, Bell got another phone call. But this time it wasn't the killer. A man who called himself Mitch was on the other end of the phone, saying that he actually knew who the killer was. Mitch told Bell that the killer's name was Paul Bateson. Mitch also stated that Bateson had actually called him a while ago too to confess. So Bateson was confessing left and right, just to everybody and anybody who would listen at this point. So with this second piece of evidence, the police went straight to Bateson's house and arrested him. Bateson was obviously drunk, and when the police asked him if he knew why he was being arrested, he simply just pointed to Bell's article open on his table, and that was that. They were actually able to recover most of the stolen items, and this was just another confirmation that Bateson was indeed Addison's killer. Bateson was charged with second-degree murder and sat in Rikers Island until his trial. During his trial in 1979, Paul Bateson stated that he was not guilty and that he confessed when he was drunk, and that none of the things he said while he was under the influence were true. He also told the judge that he felt a very great loss for Addison and that he wasn't the person that the prosecutors were making him out to be. So let's talk a little bit about the Greenwich Village bag murders. So from 1975 to 1977, there were a string of murders in the Greenwich Village called the bag murders. Gay men were disappearing as body parts were washing up on the banks of the Hudson River. Some of the recovered clothing in these bags were actually traced back to a shop that catered specifically to people in the leather subculture. Additionally, these black plastic bags were actually traced back to the New York University Medical Center. With some of these kind of context clues, investigators were wondering if Bateson could actually be behind the bag murders. Things were just a little bit too coincidental. The fact that the black plastic bags were actually from the unit that Bateson worked at before he was fired, and the fact that many of the recovered clothing was actually from a culture that Bateson himself was very much a part of. This led investigators to believe that maybe Addison wasn't Bateson's first murder. Additionally, when Bateson was in jail, evidently he told one of his friends that he had killed and dismembered many men. According to this friend, Bateson had said that killing people was the easy part. It was hiding the bodies that was really, truly hard. This friend also said that Bateson then talked about how he would kind of dismember the bodies and put them in the Hudson River, just like the bag killer had. So, seems like pretty strong evidence, but it's maybe considered hearsay. Director William Friedkin actually heard the news that Bateson had been arrested for the murder of Addison, and he went to go visit Bateson on Rikers Island. Friedkin said in an interview later that Bateson had told him that he had killed this one guy, cut him up, and threw him in the East River. Friedkin also said that Bateson told him that he wanted to confess to the bag murders to get a reduced penalty, which I don't really know how that would get Bateson a reduced sentence, since that would bring his body count from 1 to like 6 or 7. But he thought that by confessing to the bag murders, he could maybe get a reduced sentence. That being said, Bateson could really only recall one murder that was very similar to the bag murders. He couldn't think of how the other 5 or 6 people were killed. So this kind of led investigators to believe that maybe he's just kind of making this up to get a reduced sentence. Friedkin went on to direct a movie called Cruise, and this talked about how gay men were getting murdered in the Greenwich Village community. And this had a lot of mixed reviews because it made the gay community look pretty bad, but we're talking about it in this context because it's loosely based on Bateson's story. So the judge in Bateson's case actually decided that Bateson wouldn't be charged for the 6 murders because there wasn't enough evidence for it, but he did end up sentencing him to 20 years in jail for the murder of Addison Verrill. Bateson served his time and was released on parole in 2003, and 5 years later he was set completely free without parole. He continued to keep a very low profile after he was released, and it's speculated that he died in 2012. If this case sounds kind of familiar to you, it might be because Paul Bateson's character was actually portrayed in the 2nd season of Mindhunter. I really enjoyed looking a little bit deeper into this case just because, I knew that Paul Bateson was in The Exorcist. I knew that he had murdered people. I thought he had murdered multiple people, and I thought he was convicted for murdering multiple people. This is kind of a testimony, a case study of how minorities and people that are in kind of stigmatized communities, their cases just got completely swept under the rug so many times. And the fact that there was such strong evidence, the fact that Bateson actually confessed to multiple people, I think without Bateson coming forward and giving his confession, Addison's case might have never been solved, and that's very sad. I think it's kind of crazy that Bateson literally had confessed to 2 different people, and that's when the police stepped in to be like, oh yeah, now we have enough evidence to actually look into it. It makes me upset because it happened so much back in the 70s, and it still happens now, so that's really frustrating. I'm also completely surprised that Bateson didn't get charged with 1st-degree murder and instead 2nd-degree murder. He literally confessed to doing it. I don't know why it was considered 2nd-degree murder when he literally stabbed this man in cold blood. I'm glad that some justice was served, but it wasn't enough. I feel like Bateson should have gotten a life sentence and just should have been locked away forever, but the American justice system, I tell ya, it's wild out there. So that is the Exorcist murders. I hope that you guys enjoyed this story. I'm trying to kind of spread out my true crime cases just because they can get a little heavy, and I just want to make sure that I'm focusing on my mental health and all that good stuff. I'm sure you guys understand, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed this little mini series. I really enjoyed looking into all aspects of The Exorcist, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed it too. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this case, what you think of this series. I want to hear all about it. But that is all I have for you guys, so I hope that everyone has a beautiful, wonderful day, and that you continue to be the bad bitches that you are.